Hello, welcome to Muse on Minis, the audio podcast. This is Brandon. No? Do we have to restart? God damn it.
I mean...
no one cares.
Getting the intro wrong is a long-standing tradition of Muse.
That's fair. Hello and welcome to L2 Wargame, the Warmachine podcast. This is Brandon or Muteless on the forums, and I play bad factions.
Which ones?
Yes.
All the bad factions.
This is Richard. I play Protectorate and Hockey.
It's the most fair statement I think he's ever made.
This is Jeremy.
And this is Seabass, and I play Legion and Trolls.
Wait, what? Go back.
Wait, what? Say
We
that
need to
again.
rewind, because Troll Jesus plays Legion now.
Trolls Unplayable confirmed.
Scott, how many shredders do you have?
As many as Brent has.
That's not a fair amount of shredders.
Is it less than
Pretty sure
26?
that's quite a few.
Probably less than 26.
I don't know that that's the case.
Are you actually playing Legion, or is this just a joke?
I am going to test some stuff with Colgrima for a little bit, and then I think it'll actually do me a lot of good in my growth in the game to try something that's completely alien to Khador and Trolls. So
No, that's fair.
I'm going to try Legion for a little bit. I don't anticipate staying there for very long. I've got some lists that I want to try for Trolls. I want to get my list solidified for the ATC. And then after I do that, I'll probably try and get in like as many test games as I can. And then sometime I'll probably start breaking away and playing a little bit of Legion just so I can understand a little bit more about the hit and run game and see if that can shore up some of the deficiencies in my game. So it's a learning experience. I don't anticipate staying in Legion. I know that between all my friends, I have very ready access to literally everything in quadruplicate in Legion.
Oh, yeah.
So-
I mean, you could just take my Legion. It's just sitting in foam.
Just remember,
and that's what-
shredder spam. Shredder spam.
I don't have that many shredders, actually.
I can
Now,
hook you up.
if you need Scythians, I got like 9 of those things.
I also have like 4 starter boxes of Legion.
I know between you, Brandon, Carl already offered his collection to me if there's anything I need to borrow. Brent has offered his collection. Richie has offered his collection. So there's no shortage of Legion that people are willing to let me borrow. And I think it'll actually be a lot of fun. Like, I've struggled against Legion. And as a troll player, that's really a matchup that I don't think I should really struggle with that much. Trolls tend to be fairly even ground into Legion. And I've just always struggled with that matchup. I've always struggled to understand the synergies between their pieces and learn how they're going to use them. I think it's going to be really good for me when I start getting into it. I think it's going to make me a much better troll player.
Yeah, I see a lot of people don't do that, and they don't go and experience different things, and that probably holds them back a lot as a player. So, we are going to talk about today list construction and different theories and strategies behind list construction. Everybody's just looking
Sounds
at me.
good.
Sounds real good.
I put Raza as my Warcaster, and then I hit the Add Robots button until I'm done, and it works.
Okay. So,
Yeah, but with synergy change, that's not as much. Come on.
yeah, it's even better now.
Yeah, it's
No.
way better. I get free focus.
Looking at the game, when a lot of people go to build lists, and this is more from a newcomer's perspective, but a lot of people take list building for granted. Like, if you're just naturally good at building lists, then you don't really notice it. But also looking at it as a list pair. Like, you're not just building a good list, you're building 2 lists that complement each other really well. A local came to me yesterday, Merle, and was asking me about list construction and things. And we got into a long conversation about how you would build a list pair. Because he's wanting to build Laylee's Resistance with Ashlyn. And the more we looked at it, we couldn't find a lot of lists that we thought were particularly strong. And it was very easy to just put a Damiano list together that we felt was just stronger than Ashlyn. Immediately.
Well, is this with the changes now?
This is with the change. And that's part of the reason why he's a big fan of the Laylee's people.
I don't think she would be bad in theme now, since she gives the bonus to all the Elise models.
Sure. No, she does a lot of good things. I don't think she's a bad caster, and that was the argument we got on originally. Is Ashlyn bad? I look at her card, I'm like, no, she's clearly not bad. She does all these great things. She is lacking an arc node, which makes one of her tools very potent. But then looking at it on the flip side, it was hard to say that, like, when you just replace a caster with another caster and don't change the list at all, this list is better with this caster. That's hard to give a strong argument as to why this caster is not bad. So then we get to the argument of, well, you have to play to her strengths. She's only really played when she is the answer. And then we sat down, we were like, all right, well, what is she the answer to? And that's when we started getting to like heavy list design philosophy stuff. So I guess we'll just go around the table. What do people... Basically, do you build a list and then try and add it to a list pair, or do you build a list pair together? Like, what do other people do? And I can go first if other people aren't ready. But
I'll go first. So it honestly depends on whether I'm designing for a tournament or for game night.
Well, sure. No, we're assuming we're doing competitive list building.
Okay, so for me, it's a bit of both. How the metagame is right now, I find a list that either asks a really strong question, asks or answers questions I need to answer, and I will make that as my first list, and then I will build a second list to complement its weaknesses.
Okay, so you start off with building a good list. A good list in either the fact that it is very potent and people have to deal with it, or something that covers as large of a field as you can make it cover, basically. Yeah. And then your other list is supplemental to that. Okay. Jeremy, do you ever build lists?
Yes.
You add Magnus to lists and then add other models to lists?
Well,
primarily
you start
Jack
with Magnus,
Marshals.
then you add Mangler.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, do I need another Mangler or 2 Renegades?
Probably 2 Renegades.
Yeah.
Okay. God damn it. All right. Jeremy basically just builds the last theme force to be released
No.
until it's done, and then you move on to the next theme force. Not the next one in line, but the next one to come out since you finished building the previous list. So, like, the C2 theme force came out. He immediately bought, like, 26 juniors. That was the first thing he did. Then after he bought 26 juniors and got them all converted to be different, and then painted all of them, and they all had their own jack that matched their own paint scheme, then he worked on a new theme force.
Well, to be fair,
Only took
it
9
was.
months.
I had 2 versions of that.
I know.
With Jax and without Jax. That was a lot of Arcane Shield.
No, this really happened in real life.
I know it did.
All right, Scott, someone who hopefully builds lists. How do you usually approach a list pair design?
So, I approach this a little differently, I think, than a lot of people do. I'm going to say something that's going to sound really stupid, so don't immediately jump on me. And as the podcast goes, I'll explain my position. But I don't believe in asking a question and answering a problem. Maybe I'm doing those things by how I build my list anyway, but I never phrase it that way. I never try to consciously construct them that way. When I build lists, what I try to do is I try to take a part of the game that I want a list to do well at, and then I try to build a list to do that, right? So if I notice that there's a problematic list in the environment, or there's a trend in the game that's kind of moving in a certain direction, I will try to build a list that can play into that competitively, but will cover the widest range of matchups. And then when I build the second list or the pairing to that, I will look at the things that list doesn't do very well, and then I will build the other list and then try to get it to cover the widest range of matchups. Which is why a lot of times when you look at my list construction, even if it skews towards infantry or it skews towards boxes or armor, I have a tendency to take a lot of different types of models in those selections because I want to cover the widest range of matchups that I possibly can. And so that's typically how I approach it.
I usually start from a very game night mentality. I'll play a bunch of shit and throw it at the wall and, basically find what I like playing with. And then I'll refine it to the point where I like a list. And then, that is forever going to be, one of my staple lists, usually. For example, I play a lot of my Vlad 1 list with 8 heavies and mechanics and Forge Seers, and basically that's it. So, once I found that list, I knew that was a list I enjoyed playing, and I thought it was good into the majority of things. It's just a strong list. Then I went to, what are, the 3 lists in the game that I'm scared of that will show up in this, that will beat me? And then it is find the list to cover it. So kind of what Richard was saying earlier is find your A game list and then make a list to stop all the bad stuff.
It feels like a very Mark II-ish approach in a way.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how I built a lot of lists in Mark II. Is like, well, I'm going to play Krios 3 come hell or high water. He beats like 85% of the things I need to beat with this list, and then I'm going to cover my 15. I'm actually about to start the throwing shit at the wall and see what sticks with Krios 1 again, but we can get into that later.
I'm kind of excited to just do some random bullshit, like just play all kinds of crap over the next 2 months.
I'm definitely excited. I think Faithful Masses offers a lot of avenues to do that in Protectorate.
Sure, I mean, a lot of people just got their generic, easy build list. Except for Kador. I mean, they don't get good lists, but...
Have you tried not
kidding.
being a heretic? It's easy.
Nope.
I think a lot of people are kind of in that mode right now. I'm in that mode for a little bit anyway. I just got access to Kolgrima. I just got access to the Cold Stone. I'm sorry, the Northkin Elder for the Krill Stone. I just got access to all the Northkin stuff. We just got the Troll CID implemented into the live game. So I think a lot of Troll players, not just me, but a lot of Troll players are kind of in this nebulous area of like, well, I have this concept as to what's going to work for a list pair because it's tried and true and it's worked with Doomshaper 3 for forever now. And the question then becomes, what changes get made? What concessions to certain matchups do you have to make in order to cover the widest range of topics or the widest range of matchups? And I think a lot of people are kind of in that phase. And I think at some level that phase is almost cyclical. Like after every year after Warmachine weekend, I think we kind of go back to this.
Well, sure. This is definitely like the rebuilding time of the year. Like it's time for everyone to hit the drawing board and try and come up with something new before the competitive season starts up again and like tournaments are happening every weekend. At least that's how it feels in the Midwest. Like we have basically from April till November, there's something every weekend. And I don't know if other people feel that way, but like when I'm traveling 3 out of 4 weekends, it feels that way.
It can definitely be something each weekend if you want to in the Midwest.
Oh, yeah. Especially where we are, because we're just so central, and there's just like that. There's a donut of games around us, and we're the donut hole in the middle with lots of games, and there's like a 2-hour death zone around Kansas City where there's nothing. But after you get over that barrier, there's all kinds of shit in most of the directions. And there's also that 8-hour bubble.
There's so many things to do within a couple hours of Joplin. The Joplin just quit hosting events. Because I could not find a weekend where I could host events because everything was always booked.
At one point, you just have to overrun people. Like, you have to have your own events, too. And it might even just come down to the weekend you're going to be in town, like is usually what I end up doing. Like, the weekend I'm in town is when I'm running an event.
Sure. I mean, there's answers to it. I don't want to detract from the topic.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's so funny when you look at the number of events because it's absolutely true.
I just remember like 3 years ago when we were worried about we were like the trying to be up and comer guys. There were so many weekends we were like, oh man, I wish there was a tournament and like if we had just paid more attention, we could have gone to something. But I feel like there's a lot more travel. Like basically when our crew started traveling was like there wasn't really any travel to or from Kansas City at that point, and now there's a huge amount of travel involving Kansas City. That makes me a little excited. So the primary list archetypes I have here are the questions and answers list. Either you're asking questions or giving answers to commonly asked questions, like I'm answering for an armor skew, or I'm answering for infantry, or I'm answering for recursion, whatever the thing is. The field list, where this list is there to cover the majority of the field. It's your all-comers go to a game, like it's good into everything list. Then we've got meta crushers that are a list that's basically designed to play against the top 10 lists in the game. Basically is like you do the best you can to like Sebi 2 is this for me in Protectorate. He was good into like 5 or 6 of the most popular good lists in the game, and so being good into that many things in that like range band of top 10 lists in the game currently is a really good way to make it into a list.
Turns out when you need to beat Wormwood and Ghost Fleet at the same time, Sebi 2's
Wormwood, Ghost Fleet, Kane, like all of these things, like, and he's just like a solid drop into all of them. So then the last one is like laser targeted lists. Like I'm building a list to beat X. That list with these models in it, I'm going to beat that. Like, and sometimes you get locked into that. Like being like a Kador player, I know the feeling of I can't beat Crix. Like I have to literally point for point build a list to stop X. And a lot of factions get into that. Like Legion was that way with Trolls in Mark II. It was like they needed a list that could get them on the table versus Trolls. And because there was just enough Troll players that if you played one, you lost. And it usually goes to your like the short straw you get in the faction lineups. Like, Crix is supposed to be bad into Signar, and like Legion's supposed to be bad into trolls, like that kind of stuff. Like usually that's when you see these lists comes up, I think. Is when your like Achilles heel faction is popular and strong, that's when you have to build all out to stop one thing.
I think the other time silver bullet lists come up is in local metas, when you're trying to hunt the king of the hill, so to speak.
Yeah, if you're trying to stop one person that you commonly play against that beats you and you know what they're playing, then yeah, this is another example of when you could do this. I mean, I think most people, I mean, it might be if you don't travel, then that's most likely your biggest competition is your big fish locally. It's like you're trying to beat that guy, you got to play to beat him. And don't feel bad to game for people in your meta if you know they're going to be there and they know that's what you got to beat. Like yeah, if armor skews are running all over the place, does it make you a jerk to build an anti-armor list if everyone's playing anti-armor versus the one guy you keep losing to? Like, it's not really your fault. He's playing the thing that you have to beat. So these are, I think, the four most common archetypes for a list. Does anyone actually sit down with the concept of, I'm going to build a pair of lists, or do they all sit down and build the first list? Regardless of what order you build them in, if you build, like, the field answer first or the targeted answer first, like, regardless of which of those archetypes you pick to start, or do you sit down and go, I'm building two lists? Because I've never actually done this, but I've done the theory craft behind it.
The only time I have ever built two lists as a pair was when Fiora 1 and Durst were on ADR and Mark 2.
You were just like, I'm going to take these two casters, build lists to cover each other, and put them on the table.
But I normally don't do that since ADR is not a thing I don't have a reason to.
I would assume that, generally speaking, that's not the case. I think it's an interesting... I mean, obviously, you're going to build one before the other, just the way things work. Do you ever change, like, a go-to list? Like my Vlad list, for example. I would never really consider changing it unless, like, something major happened to the models within the list. Because I can't... Every time I try to squeeze points somewhere, it just doesn't work. Because I think I found the natural conclusion of that list. Does anyone ever go back and fundamentally change a list that they've been playing for a long time to make it fit better with another list?
I do think that the Sevi2 list qualifies. So for those who aren't aware, the Sevi2 list, Brandon kind of put me onto this list. The original list was 3 Dervishes, 3 Templars, and Blessing, and then support in Creator's Might, and then...
Roven being the only real exception, but yeah.
Roven's the only real exception. But the other version of that list I run is 3 Reckoners, 2 Redeemers, Blessing, based on what I think I need to beat. Mm-hmm. And that, even though it's 1 light less, it does fundamentally change how the list plays, because you're playing a guns list, you're not automatically running the first 2 turns of the game. You might make ranged attacks on the second turn, so you have to be mindful of how that impacts you in scenario.
When I'm building lists, it's not rare at all for me to sit down and build them as a pair. In fact, we did that with my Doomshaper 3 list, because for a long time I was running Doomshaper 3 Madrak 2. Those lists were built specifically as a pair to each other. And then later, as Ghost Fleet became more and more prominent, I realized that I'm going to need something that's going to answer that, that's going to give me some play into that, but also going to give me play into a lot of different game types that I'm going to see. So then we switched off after MusonCon, and I switched off to Grim 2. And when I switched off to Grim 2, that list was built as a replacement companion to my Doomshaper 3 list. So they were built essentially in tandem to each other. And I honestly think that's why that particular list pair has been so successful for me, or at least it's been successful enough for me to justify to continue to play and build it, because those lists are a natural complement in terms of they both do something very unique. They both present interesting challenges to my opponents as to what they're going to drop. They're not obvious in which drop that you have to make, because there's a lot of times where, say, that Doomshaper 3 list can handle a lot more infantry than people think it can. Like, it just can. And then on the other side of that, there's a lot of times where that Grim 2 list can handle a lot more armor than people think it can handle. So the two aren't necessarily super obvious, and I think that's kind of the sweet spot that you want your list pair to be in. And I think the only way you get that is to either build your list first, build the complement, and spend months and months and months of refining the complementary list to it, or you build them in tandem to each other and then put them in the wild and start seeing what happens.
I've jotted down a couple things of what I would like to refer to as like archetypes of list pairs. Like we talked about earlier with our lists, going through here. So let's say we've got a pair of 2 lists. Basically, opposites attract is the first one basically I have here, and it's I don't want to build 2 armor lists, like armor-centric lists, because that's obviously countered by the same thing. So it puts you into a tough spot if you get matched up against someone who can't answer it. So obviously you don't want to have your 2 lists be too similar usually. Questions and answers. I know this was popular in Mark II, is one list asks a question, the other one answers them. So like they're good for being opposites, but they're both kind of independent of what they each other have to do. One list being anti-infantry, one list being anti-armor. It is nice because it lets you cover all the bases, but it's negative because it can put you into list chicken situations, which I think a lot of people don't consider when they build lists, is that it will put them in list chicken situations. Last one here being Boogeyman, taking a list in your pair that you don't actually intend to play simply because people will expect you to play it, or you think it will affect their list selection choices. So like one example used to be like Butcher 2 Mad Dogs of War, when you just have a million Doom Reavers with AD and all the stuff they do, and like having that list with you, but you don't ever actually expect to play it. Like you have another very generalist list in your pair that you're planning on playing to everyone because you know that they have to select what they're playing off of that. Like Karchev Mad Dogs was a good example of that list. Like even if you don't plan on playing it, putting that into a list pair means that your opponent's taking anti-armor every time. They just can't afford not to. And so it allows you to play whatever you want, basically. And then the final one was I put Doubling Down. Intentionally building 2 similar lists that are just countered by slightly different things. A good example is the Testament Recursion list and a Harby list that's basically the same models. So you can have... one list is countered by Remove from Play or Soul Prevention, and the other list is countered by Grievous Wounds and Preventative Healing. So whichever list they have, or whichever answer they have, you just play the opposite. And the odds of them having both in high quantities in one list is usually pretty uncommon. But if they do, you're kind of just screwed, which is like the opposite of the first one.
Sure, well, that's kind of the definition of doubling down, right? Like you're going 100% to something.
Everything I have is that you don't have an answer to both of these simultaneously. Does anybody have any other thoughts on what could be on this list? Or has anyone ever tried to build a list pair that doesn't quite fit into one of those that's a little different?
I've actually doubled down in Trolls. I think you could say that. For a little bit, especially while just the huge armor spam of all the Warjacks you could possibly get, when that was really, really, really popular. I actually played Doomshaper 3 and then Horgle 2. Mm-hmm. So I kind of doubled down on the anti-armor list. But by doing that, what it did is it forced them to... They would look at Horgle 2 with a Mountain King and 4 Slag Trolls, and then you would look at Doomshaper 3, which is just all the heavies forever. And then if you're if you're the Khador player playing 10 Mad Dogs, or you have a list that's a whole bunch of rockets, like you have to drop the Mad Dog list. Like, you have to drop that list, because the rockets aren't going to kill either one of those lists. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, well, I know you're dropping a whole bunch of Marauders, so I'm going to let you chew on Arm 20, Doomshaper 3 heavies for a while, and then I'm going to laugh hysterically when Power Strength 16 is not enough. Because you're not slamming me anywhere. You're not sending me anywhere. You're going to get 1 Power Strength 20 attack at 3 dice, and that's it.
Yep.
And then after that, you die. And you're probably going to lose a couple of them when I go in. So it was one of those things that, like, you can double down. But I think when you double down, though, I think you have to, first off, you have to expect the fact that if one person shows up with answers to your particular, whatever you're doubling down on, you're hosed. You're done. Unless that person makes a significant mistake in play, it's over. The other thing you have to remember, too, is that doubling down on a particular strategy is only as good as the strategy is present. There was one tournament we went to in Colombia. I was playing Doomshaper 3 and Horgle 2, and it was a really cool idea, and I did really well in the tournament. I didn't have any problems until I got to the last round, and then realized like,
he's not a troll drop.
Yeah, Horgle 2 is not a troll drop. Come to find out, if you get stuck with Horgle 2 looking at another troll player across the table, that's probably not an ideal matchup. But, even at the end of that day, I'm looking at you and Brent and Carl, and I'm like, yeah, I asked for it. Like, I rolled the dice and I took a gamble that I was going to see X lists. And when I didn't see as many of those as I thought, I paid the price for that. I paid a big price for that because I ended up losing my final round.
I think that's one of the reasons that opposites attract or question and answer has always appealed to me, because it leaves my bases covered. And one of the things as a Protector player, like Protector's never really going to do anything flashy, but it's going to be reliable every time. And that's one of the things that appeals to me in the faction and appeals to me in list building.
And beyond just putting this on paper, you also have to remember that some factions just are not designed to cover the field. Like, Khador has never been a cover-the-field faction. They're very good at asking questions, which is the closest they come to covering the field. But other than that, they're only really good at covering specific matchups. So when you sit down and you're like, I'm going to build a Khador list where I've got 2 lists that cover everything, like, you just can't do it. Because, like, usually one list has to go to covering Signar, which usually gets you pretty good into other gun lines too. But it's not very good at getting you into like any of the Crix or infantry skews. So then you build an anti-Crix list, and then like someone shows up with Scorn, and you just get crushed. So it's just very hard for some factions. Where like Protector is obviously very good at just sitting out and spreading out across the entire meta. Like, they can play one very well balanced list into a lot of different things. So some factions you sit down and you don't really have that as an option, but you do the best you can. So
It's really interesting because when I sit down to look at troll lists, like I've obviously been working a lot with Kolgrima and trying to decide where I want to be with her. And for that matter, Madrak 1, I don't know that he's going to make my pairing. I don't think he does make my pairing. But Madrak 1 is obviously one of those casters you could look at for trolls. The thing is I actually think like that's one of the things that makes building troll lists a little easier than building lists for, say, Khador. Because trolls have always been, in Mark III, in my opinion, they have always been the 50-50 faction. If you are looking for a good matchup into trolls, you're not going to find it. Like, I don't think there's such a thing as an 80-20 matchup into trolls. I honestly don't. I don't think trolls have an 80-20 matchup into anyone else. But I don't think, like, trolls are like a 50-50 faction.
I mean, yeah, they're definitely the brawler faction. They like to get in there and just kind of duke it out with everybody.
Sure, and trolls want to play an honest game, but trolls have such a huge variety of warlocks and a huge variety of play styles with each warlock.
Well, plus they're pretty flexible with their support.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like they're a 50-50 faction. And excuse me. And so when you talk about covering the game, I actually think in SteamRoller 2017, the ability to cover the widest range of matchups is more important than being a specific answer. I actually think that that's very important. So I think that's why trolls are going to be very strong in 2017 and in 2018 when it rolls around, is because we don't struggle to come up with a specific answer. We can answer most of the meta. It may not be a wonderful answer. It may not be a 70-30 game in our favor. It'll be a 50-50, and you're just going to have to play your way out of it. But you can do it. And so I feel like the mark of a faction that is going to struggle in SR 2017 are factions that have those glaring gaps. And if those gaps are something that happens to be very popular right now, I think you're really going to struggle. And I think that fundamentally changes the way that your lists are going to be constructed. And you made the comment about Khador. Khador obviously struggles into Crix right now, specifically Ghost Fleet. Khador very much struggles into Ghost Fleet and Denny 1, because everything that list wants to pick on is everything that Khador does, right? That list doesn't fight fair. That list is faster than you, it threats further than you, it threats a better ranged game than you.
Actually, my problem with, specifically on this topic, again, this is a little bit about list construction too, but you can build Khador lists that shut down Denny 1 Ghost Fleet. They just don't do anything else.
That's exactly my point. Yeah. And so the lists that, and this is why it's important to list building, this is why I wanted to talk about this, or at least bring it up, was when you are looking at covering the widest range of possibilities in a faction, you have to accept the fact that there are going to be matchups you're going to be very cold to, because this game is extremely deep. And this game is extremely complex, and you can't answer everything. It's impossible. And factions that can answer the most, I feel like, are going to be fundamentally in a stronger position.
Yeah.
I think that's what should drive your list building or your list generation process more than any other thing, is looking at it going, how do I cover the maximum number of matchups between two lists and still have a game into all of them. I guess that's really the point I'm trying to make. I'm sorry, I took a long way to make a point, but I think it's worth making.
That's a fair point. Obviously, when you're doing these, if you get to pick your ups, your peaks and your valleys on your like matchup chart, you obviously want to try to pick the peaks to be on the popular lists. Like you want to play, like Crix is super popular right now, so like, obviously you would want your slightly good side to be towards like Crix or Signar right now, and then you'd let maybe fall down like the trolls and the minions, just the lesser played factions currently. Mercs is on a huge upswing too. So clearly you need to be able to evaluate the meta, figure out what's popular, because you're going to want to cover those things first. Obviously, if you can cover everything, you'd like to. Yeah, I think it's more important when you're trying to make a list pair. A lot of people start with, I want to play X, and they just try and jam something on the other side of it to make it good. And then I think it's more important that you build them in tandem and understand the strengths and weaknesses of the caster are obviously important, but you don't necessarily build the list to the model-specific strengths. Butcher One, for example, is really good at being slow and hitting hard, but you don't want to necessarily build that list if your other list doesn't complement that. So you want to maybe not do what the caster does best and maybe what they do second or third best if it actually ends up making your list pair stronger, because it opens up your options for your second list.
When you are building lists, it's worth looking at threat ranges and building to threat. That's very much a real thing to build with. Like, one of the reasons why I'm playing the models I am playing in my Grim 2 list is because I can threaten a country mile, and when you close, they're pretty nasty. They're going to make your head hurt. And you can do that. There's a lot of different ways that you can build the threat. You can build to a melee threat. You can build to a threat. This is something that I don't think a lot of people pay enough attention to when you're building lists. But there's enough terrain on the table in SR 2017. You can build to the terrain. Like, it's okay to put in another Earthborn Dire Troll in your list, because there's a very real chance there's going to be enough obstructions to get them to arm 22, or enough forests to get them to speed 7. It's okay to build to those things.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest things I found out with the games with Raza in 2017 is that when there's a forest or in the site blocking terrain in the middle of the table has been huge for Raza, because it allows you to hide Raza, and if it's rough terrain that you can move through, you just don't care about it, because you'll still trample through and beat them to death anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reason I play Vlad is his feat, 99%. Like, being able to sit down and just out-threat people is such a big deal. Because if in a pre-measured game, most opponents will just position to be out of threat range, and they find that better than just accepting the incoming damage. And when it's, Khador Heavy's under Sign's Importance, it's probably the correct call, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes they don't realize that your only option is to get in the zone, and, you just have to put 3 heavies in the zone and just hope you don't die.
That kind of goes back to another point that I see happen a lot with newer players. I'll be watching a game, and they'll come up and they'll turn in their player sheets or whatever the case may be. I'll be like, okay, 5-0 scenario win. So I guess that was a really bloody game. And then they'll look at me and they'll be like, nope, I only lost 3 points worth of stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Get your ass in the zone, son. You're going to look it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you don't get your butt in the zone, you lose the game anyway. So you might as well just take the chance and hope your opponent's dice goes lousy. Or the more proactive you are in a game, the more opportunity you're giving your opponent to misplay. And sometimes people just screw up and make mistakes. Lord knows I've made more than my fair share.
Scenario awareness and risks is a very, very important part of the game that I don't think a lot of people are.
I don't think a lot of people know how to build to that, is the thing. I don't think there's ever a game that I've seen where people are just like, yeah, I had no idea what the scenario score is, or I have no idea what to do in scenario. I just think a lot of times people just don't know how to build for it. They don't know what elements you can put in a list that are going to help turn that on for you, depending on faction, right? Here's a good example. There's 2 particular light war beasts and trolls that are absolutely excellent at scenario play. One of them is the Bouncer, because the Bouncer is a shield guard. He's armed 21 after the Krillstone. He's 26 or 28 boxes, I can't remember. I think 24 or 26 boxes, actually. For a 9-point War Beast, and he has 2 initials. For a 9-point War Beast, with Reach and Speed 5, without any kind of buffs whatsoever, he can pretty much threaten a zone by himself. Add to that the fact that he's not going to go down easy, and he sure as heck isn't going to go down without a fight, means that you have a piece you can put in a scenario zone that you might not necessarily lose immediately, or if you have something else in the scenario zone, your opponent may be forced into making a tough decision. If you have a Mauler or an Earthborn and a Bouncer in the zone, they're probably going to focus on the Earthborn. He's the greater threat.
Mm-hmm.
That means your Bouncer, like, you have an opportunity there. There's a way for you to try and get your Bouncer to trade up. So maybe through buffs or whatever the case may be, you can get your Bouncer to hit hard enough to trade up with that piece. But you can't do that until you understand the value of what makes a Bouncer a good beast. And a lot of people look at it and be like, oh, well, he's just a really expensive shield guard. Well, no, he's really not. He's a lot more than just a really expensive shield guard. First off, he's not that expensive, but he's more than just a shield guard. He's an exceptional piece. The Night Troll is another exceptional scenario piece for trolls. Eyeless Sight, so you can get through clouds. He has Stealth, so you can't shoot him from the other end of the zone. He gets free charges versus warrior models. He has 3 initials. He's Power Strength 12 before buffs. And he's a 7-point model. This guy is absolutely excellent to stick in the end of a zone and to be like, okay, well, if you want that zone, you're going to have to come flush me out. So I'm going to stick him at the back of a zone that a circular zone that you can only control with a unit. And then I'm going to say, all right, come flush me out. Because the minute you put that unit in the zone, I'm going to send a Night Troll into it. And between his Animus being able to bunch everybody up, which makes for some really interesting sprays off of Colgrima, I might add. But between his Animus bunching people up, plus a free charge, plus a bunch of initials, plus Stealth so you can't gun him down easy, plus Eyeless Sight so you can't hide, like, that's an exceptionally strong scenario piece that I don't think people realize is an exceptionally strong scenario piece. And I'm speaking from a troll perspective because that's what I play and that's what I know. But every faction has pieces like these that I think if people understood a little bit more about maybe different ways to use them or how to build towards scenario, or at a minimum, what concessions you can make towards scenario, I think people would do a lot better in scenario. And I think that's also a really critical part of list building that tends to get overlooked.
2 things, actually. First, the Bouncer is 22 health for fact checking. Also, a Tractor on the Night Troll can be used to pull models out of the zone or contesting range. And a lot of people don't remember stuff like that. They think of it as only of its actual intended use. They don't think of it as, oh, I need to clear his flag. Well, this guy's barely towing it. I just got to charge at an angle where I can just barely move him off that.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I'm sorry, what did you say about the Bouncer?
He has 22 health.
22 health boxes. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. I knew he had somewhere in the 20s.
Not only do people not build towards scenario, I see a lot of people not play towards scenario. Because a lot of people, it's like, well, if I put models in the zone, I'm going to lose them, and that feels bad. But when you put your Bouncer into the zone, if they come in for the Bouncer, you get to trade up with a heavy next turn. And if they don't, you get points for free, and you get to still put the Bouncer in front of your heavies and have your screen. Sometimes the right play is just to take the risk on killing the Bouncer if you're Scott's opponent, and then just hope he has to overcommit to kill whatever kills the Bouncer. Because otherwise you'll be behind on scenario, and you just can't take that risk in 2017.
I agree. I think the big thing is I think people don't... I think we're talking about a chicken and the egg kind of a complex here. Because I think if the average player, and I include myself in the average player bracket, I find myself doing these things all the time, doesn't necessarily understand exactly why you're using what you're using, or exactly what you can put in your list to help you with kind of those scenario kind of elements like that. If you don't see that, you're inherently going to play weaker to scenario because the piece trades just become that much worse, right? So I put my Colgrima list up online. My Colgrima list has 2 Night Trolls in it. I have gotten mercilessly heckled about why that's not just a second Earthborn Dire Troll. Well, I have very specific reasons as to why that's not a second Earthborn Dire Troll, and they may change before it's all said and done. There's nothing saying I'm right and nothing saying I'm wrong. But I have those in there
I'm pretty sure that Carl was the one that convinced you nitrals were good like 6 months ago.
He absolutely did.
Yeah, he looked at it and like,
for these
if
exact
this model was in Legion, it'd be like 30 points.
yeah. I'll never forget. He's like, "Why aren't you playing nitrals?" I'm like, "Carl, I don't know.
They're not
I
good,
don't think
that's
they're
why."
that good." I'm like, "Come on, Carl." And then I looked at him and I'm like, "Holy crap! I think you're right.
They're better than people expect, especially in a
They
rage
are
faction.
far better than people
Yeah.
think."
I mean, fuck, you can wild aggression one of those things in Doomshaper 2, and it like goes forever. It's got overtake and like 3 dice to hit, 3 initials, 3 buys, probably a free charge.
Yeah. Well, even like I don't know, just the Nitro alone is just really an exceptionally strong scenario piece for those reasons. And even if you can't crank him up to like power strength 30 or something, like, because a lot of people are like, well, the only reason why you should play Nitro is with Ragnar because you can get him up to power strength 18. Well, I disagree. Power strength 16, power strength 16 on a 7-point head or a 7-point light is plenty good. So because they're 7 points, like you can use them to trade, you can use them to do a whole bunch of other stuff that people just don't see coming. But the most important thing I think they provide to a list is that scenario presence, and that when you don't realize the efficacy of a piece like a Nitro, then you have a tendency to just immediately click the add Mauler button until you can't click it anymore. What happens is people just add, like, they're like, oh, well, like Juggernauts are hyper efficient, right? They're 12 points, or Marauders are hyper efficient, or Maulers are hyper efficient. They absolutely are. So what people do is they add them, and they keep adding them, and then when it comes down to it, they're looking at the table and they're down, 4-1 on scenario, and they're wondering what can I do to get back in the game, and they can't put that Mauler in that zone, because if they put the Mauler in the zone, then they're losing a much larger portion of their army, and they're losing something that they're relying on to be able to anchor to, because they've invested all of their points in pieces that are meant to trade out, not necessarily trade up or trade down. They're investing all their points in pieces they're trying to end the game with, but they have nothing that gets them to that point in the scenario game where they can end it. And so whenever you're looking at a player who's doing that, I actually think it's a problem for them, because they can't put these models into the scenario zone because they'll lose them if they do, and they can't afford to lose the models. So without understanding why you would take certain pieces for scenario, they're kind of automatically forcing themselves not to play towards scenario.
I mean, it's a general troll problem of history. Like, they've always tried to build all of their beast lists, except for EE was always like 4 heavies, nothing else. And so now that they're playing a scenario game where they need to spread out a little more, they're having trouble adjusting, which is fair.
I agree, and the problem is probably more exacerbated in trolls than anywhere else. I agree, but I think players in every faction suffer from that to some degree or another.
So, speaking of a good scenario piece, I am happy that the Vanguard is 10 points now.
I think it should be like 9, at least. That thing is too expensive still, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Well, considering it was 6 points in the last edition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was 6 points, and the Nomad was
6 points.
Was 6 points. Were they the same?
Yeah.
They cost the same again. It's fine.
I thought that the Nomad was 1 more point. No. Are you sure they weren't 5?
No, they were 6.
Okay.
Vanguards were hella expensive.
They were just better because, like, Nomads, they lost a power, right? They're only POW 16s in Mark II. Nomads got something this edition.
They got that repair thing.
They had something else, too. They were not POW, like, 17 or...
Yeah, they gained 1 strength, I think. Yeah. Of course, I think most Mercjacks did.
Oh, yeah.
Making sure you include strong scenario pieces is definitely a part of it. It's obvious in Exemplar Interdiction that you should take Knight Seneschals because they're real good, but
they're certainly good at scenario. But I mean, they're not helping you win on scenario necessarily. I mean, they are solo, but I think it's obviously if you're building lists, both of your lists should be prepared to play a strong scenario game. And primarily the best way to do that, if you don't have a good idea of like particular pieces in your army, play fast models or high tempo models that like get up the board and threaten your opponent, make them want to back up. Anything you do to put your opponent on their back heel will usually give you a good in for scenario, because it'll end up with them placing their models slightly farther back, which will get you slightly farther more of the board for you, and so it kind of spirals that way and gets you board control. That's why I play Vlad. Like Vlad is actually one of the best scenario casters, I think, in Khador because of the threat range he applies to the board. Also, you can like run 16 inches with your jacks to reposition if you need to.
Well, I think there's also a level at which people tend to... There are times where I will run forward to Doomshaper 3, and I know I could hold on to that feat one more turn. In order to get myself the position I need in scenario now, I'm going to use my feet now. Because I know if I use my feet, they won't bother coming into me. They're not going to walk into me just to give me the alpha. They're not going to do that.
So does it feel wrong because in the past that's been the not correct play? Or does it feel wrong because you think it's just unfortunate that you have to use your feet in that way?
I think it feels wrong because it's unfortunate that you're not getting the mileage out of your feet that everybody thinks. And I think that's actually a player problem. I don't think it's a model problem. The reason why I say that is because whenever we play a caster, like, what do we think of, right? Like, what's in that? Like, when we look at that caster's feet, like, what do we think of? We think of the dream scenario, right? So when I think of Doomshaper 3, I'm just like, man, you know what'll be awesome? If I can set myself up and then I'm going to feet, and then the same turn that I feet, I'm going to charge in, I'm going to get all these boosted attacks and get this massive alpha, and then he can't do anything to me because none of my beasts will die, and I'm just going to table him on bottom of 3.
Have you tried holding the feet an extra turn and just like taking your licks?
Oh yeah, there are several games where I've done that, specifically against Legion, against Fiona 2, because Legion has a little bit of trouble dealing with that much armor anyway, so he has to focus down to get me. And then the turn when I go in, if I can make every one of my attacks a boosted 2-hit roll, that ups my ante on her feet so much that it forces her to play in a very scattered phrase, or in a very scattered state. In fact, there was one game in particular I was playing against a local Legion player, absolutely good guy, good player. We're going back and forth, and like he runs up, I run up, and turn 2 comes. And I start running, and I position myself, and then I just say go. Like, I cast Implacability. Doomshaper camps everything except what he cast Implacability for. I say go. He looks at me like I'm insane. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, go. He's like, didn't you mean defeat? I'm like, no, we're going to try it this way because I think I'm right, and I think you're wrong. And I think if I'm right, I think I win this game. And I think I win this game on your feet. And so he's like, there's no way this happens. So we start looking about it. We start talking about it. Well, he plays his game, comes into me, and then, sure enough, he kills a Mauler. He kills my Earthborn. So I have a Mauler, Mulg, Axer, Bouncer. Through better positioning, I could have saved the Earthborn. I just kind of goofed up on that one. Yeah, I made a mistake. But you know what? Sure enough, when I send him Mulg the next turn, when every attack is a boosted Mat 7.
Yeah, he probably easily kills 2 by himself.
He did, easily. Well, because you're going to rage him, and then you're going to stone, right? So Mulg's swinging at power strength 23. So he's dice up 6 when he hits an angel. So, it didn't take long before... And there were times where I would, hit an angel, and then, I would swing again and I would miss. I still need, 10s to hit, right? So you're not going to hit all those. But the thing is I hit enough, and I hit often enough, that she ended up blowing her stack just to get her stuff combat effective next turn. So she didn't have the Fury for buffs. So when the rest of the list came back into me, and that's also including things like I swing with Mulg, I hit, I'm dice up 6, boost damage. So I deal 20 damage. And then I charge in with an Axer on the other side of it to where it can't really go anywhere else. So I know I'm going to get 2 swings at it with an Axer. And so swing at it with an Axer, hit, kill it. Or swing at it with an Axer, it misses, it has to move out of melee range. So swing at it because it can't get far enough away with my Axer again, hit, kill it. And so things like that happened frequently in that turn. So I basically left him without his angels, was essentially what happened. And then for the rest of the game, he was stuck using Nerfs and Seraphs trying to bring down a Mauler, Mulg, an Axer, and a Bouncer. That's not going to work.
Especially with your feet being up the next turn, it dramatically reduces the amount of work he's going to get done.
Oh, yeah, he could not. He got no work done on the following turn.
In fact, but he's actually at that point in danger of healing your War Beasts if any of them had damage on them.
He actually took 3 shots on Mulg, and the first shot he broke even with, the second shot he broke even with, the third shot his dice dipped on him. So Mulg ends up healing back 6 damage, 5 damage. So Mulg is fresh now. And then he's like, whoop, no more attacks this turn.
Yep, and then he snacks on the narrative.
And that's a player problem, because we have a tendency to look at it and say, oh, this is the dream scenario. And we always want to live the dream. But there are times, especially for scenario play, and especially when you're talking about list construction, there are times whenever you just have to look at the table and be like, yep, this isn't optimal. This isn't what I want to do. But if I don't do this now, I lose. It's a lot like Vlad 2 or Vlad 1 into Haley 2. There's a lot of times, depending on the scenario, you blow your feet turn 1. Like, you will blow your feet turn 1 to get in the zone so he can't get you out.
Well, not turn 1, turn 2, but yeah.
Sure, yeah. I mean, however that timing works. I'm not a Vlad player.
Well, because you don't score till bottom of 2, so you always run on turn 2. I've played that matchup like 4 times. I've only feeded to run into zones once, and it worked. But I don't know if that's the reason it worked. I think it was actually just because of key dice rolls went my way. Like, randomly, Stormclads failed to take out a couple Marauders, and then they got to live. Or he also made the mistake of walking into melee with one of them because he assumed that he was going to kill me. And then I got to cripple a Stormclad early because he made a mistake.
Playing into control feats is when a lot of it... I lost a game to Kruger 2 recently because I haven't played against Kruger 2 in a long time, and it's like, well, I think I'll be fine if I don't have a model in that zone. 100% wrong. Should just ran into both zones and then just hoped he didn't have enough juice to get there. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of times what you have to do is you have to waste a counter feat. You just have to run your models into them and just hope it gets there. Example from Mark 2 was, like, sometimes if you had an armor feat and you were playing against Harbinger, you just had to armor feat and run your infantry into Harbinger's feat and hope enough of them lived to win you the game.
Well, but I think that goes back to having pieces that make that easier for you to do. Because when you're looking at your list and you're like, well, I got to run everything into a zone, and you're looking at Kruger 2, who's looking at, like, you're looking across the table at, like, Megalith plus a whole bunch of other big, heavy rock guys that now have, like, now they hit pretty hard, and they're not very expensive. When you're looking across the table at that, on top of that, you're looking at a Gallows caster with TK and an exceptional feat. I think sometimes you have to have in list construction a plan for hard scenario games like that, and I think that more to the point, or probably most to the point, I think that's when it's very important to understand when you're building your lists how you're going to play in the scenario, what pieces are going to let you play in the scenario, why is it important to protect these pieces, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. And I think a lot of that goes right back to list construction.
That's definitely one of the reasons I moved to Raza from Sevi 2 is the +2 speed helps a lot to be effective on scenario with the Jack Brick. Because Sevi 2's got all the tools, but he doesn't crush armor the hardest, and he also doesn't have +2 speed in Pathfinder, which will lose you games against scenario casters.
I think it's also important to remember that you're not going to cover the entire game, because obviously if there was something that covered the entire game, it'd be played.
Correct.
I mean, they don't, but they're the closest, certainly, by a long shot. So I think we've talked a lot about the different points of what we think you should do during list building. So basically wrapping up the list building and like into like a small little package here. When you sit down to build a list pair, before you've selected casters or faction, even if you've got multiple faction options, just sit down and basically just think about what you think the current meta is. And that might be part of it, is evaluating the meta correctly. And not everyone has a lot of knowledge about that. Like, I obviously travel a lot. Scott travels a lot. Richard's been traveling more with us. If you listen to podcasts and things, is a good way to get caught up. You can go to Discount Games Inc. and look at their tournament reports and see who's winning the big tournaments. You go to Warmachine Weekend, see who's won qualifiers this year and what they were playing. Just try and tune into the communities and see what each faction's playing. Post on the community boards, like the different Facebook pages. So when you're sitting down to build a list pair, I think the most important thing is, like I said, identifying the meta. Like knowing where you're going, knowing what things are going to be there. Not like headhunting certain players, but like knowing that, hey, no one plays minions within 6 hours of my house. So when I go to the fucking like mini con we're having next week that's going to have 18 players at it, I should probably not worry about playing against minions too much. I should probably have you should not be like, oh man, number one list, 100% countering minions. Like, obviously don't do that. But like, so maybe sit down, write out like a chart or a list of like, these are like the 12 lists I think are really strong that I'm likely to see. And you should probably have at least a game plan going into those matchups, even if you don't have a specific list pair drop for them. And then once you've done that, if you haven't already set on a caster or a faction yet, you should probably throw some stuff at the wall, get some stuff in the works, like brainstorm, sit down and like, okay, well, if I was going to play X, I think I could probably build a like Sorsha 2 list that covers like Crick, Signar, and Scorn, and then like fucking something else for the other 6 matchups I'm worried about. And so like you sit down, they're like, all right, well, yeah, maybe I can make this work, and then get like some general archetypes in your head of the 2 lists you're going to build, and then sit down and try and build them like to that. Because I see a lot of people sit down and when they struggle, they get like writer's block for building a list, and this happens to me sometimes. And like you're trying to build the list because you don't know what you're building it to be, and usually that's when you come into problems. And you start throwing shit at the wall, and you just kind of end up with this weird hodgepodge of good things that don't do anything specific. And then you sit down and you're like, oh man, my list is like too bad at this, and you're like, yeah, because your list doesn't work together very well. Like your list doesn't stop them from doing anything. Your list doesn't take advantage.
And just because a unit is FAU does not mean you have to take all of them.
That's correct. Don't do what Jeremy says.
But I also think a common misconception people do, something people sometimes get wrong, is they will sit down and they'll have a matchup or they'll have a game plan in mind, and they'll start building a list to it. And then they'll almost zero that list in on a particular matchup. And so what they'll do is they'll swing that matchup to like a 70-30 in their favor, right? And that's, to me, that's the wrong way to build a list. You want to build a list to get you a 50-50 game. I think everybody is so invested in getting a, quote, good matchup into something that you end up making concessions to a matchup you may never see. And if you do that, you may end up with models in your list that just aren't that good. I think a lot of people are doing that right now in the Ghost Fleet matchup for obvious reasons. Ghost Fleet's very strong. I think a lot of people are doing that with a lot of other matchups, armor matchups specifically. And so you end up going down this rabbit hole where you're trying to get like this really excellent matchup, and all that ends up happening is that when you finally get paired up against that Crix player or that Khador player, whoever it may be, you end up dropping your ace in the whole list, but you don't end up getting the matchup you wanted, and you end up weaker towards their off list because all you've done is force them into their other list. That's it. That's all you've done. So in a way, sometimes when you're trying to build these super hard answers, you end up surrendering list chicken at the same time. And that's very, very, very obvious with the Crix matchup right now. And there are some inherent things that are different with Ghost Fleet and Dark Host because those lists themselves are exceptionally strong. I think in a lot of ways that exemplifies the point I'm trying to make. It proves the point I'm trying to make in that in order for people, because we did it, I did it, in order for me to get a good, air quotes, matchup into Ghost Fleet, I ended up taking a list that was just god-awful into Dark Host. And all I did was just force the Crix player to play Dark Host. He wasn't going to drop Ghost Fleet into me. He's not going to drop a list into me that he thinks he's going to lose with. He's going to drop the other list and play for... He's going to drop the other list and play for the 50-50. And I think if more people... I think when you're sitting down to build a list, if you look at the game and you're like, okay, I want to get a 50-50 matchup here, I think that's ideally where you should be. My Grim 2 list is built to do that. I have played my Grim 2 list several times into the Ghost Fleet Dark Host matchup. It's about 50-50. That's all I want it to be. Because if it's a 50-50 matchup, then the better player is likely to win that game, barring dice and silliness and weird things like that. The 50-50 matchup is just that. It's a coin toss. So the better player is more likely to win that game. And I'm willing to take those odds. I'm willing to place the bet that I can outplay you. And if I can't, then I'll lose and I'll move on. But at least I know I've lost with an honest game, and I've tried my best to get a good game out of it, instead of trying a super skew and then just felt hopeless when Sorsha 2, with all the rifles and Shatterstorm, ended up not getting to take any shots whatsoever because Coven feeded on top of 2, or bottom of 1.
This is something you have to approach in list construction, like especially if you're playing Opposites Attract or Double Down. You have to accept if you're playing... So I'm playing Raza Testament as my list pair right now, and I just accept that, like, if you play if I lose list selection, like, I might just lose this game. You have to accept that.
Well, at the point that you're in that situation, yeah, you have to actually understand it.
You have to accept that you just lose, and you just have to play the best game you can. And also, one of the big things about list creation in general is you just have to accept that you can be wrong about the metagame, or you can be right about the metagame and not play against the matchups. Like
You can be correct about the metagame and not get the matchups
The metagame
you wanted,
could be 40% cricks, and you could not play against cricks a single round of the tournament.
Sure.
So you just have to accept
Absolutely.
that you're like a lot of metagame guessing and list creation is flying blind.
As far as the 50-50, the important thing to realize when he was talking about you don't want a 70-30, you want a 50-50. You obviously do want the 70-30, but you're obviously getting diminishing returns when the more and more you sell out for a specific thing. But in some situations, I do want a 70-30, or a 60-40 or an 80-20. Like sometimes I do want that matchup, but there's a reason behind it, and it's usually never I'm going to play the game. Like if I build a list like a Sorsha 2 list that is 99% into Ghost Fleet anyone, like you have no chance of winning this game barring like 9 consecutive boxcars. And then my opponent sees that, they're not going to play that. But I can take that and put that into my list selection. And okay, so now I just have to beat Ghost Fleet. Despite having a list that's really good into Ghost Fleet, I'm never going to play it. I'm going to play the Dark Host. And so if you're set up for that, you can take advantage of it. But a lot of people get the big eyes and they get tunnel vision and don't think about, they just won't play that list, obviously. And that actually, I think, is a lot of what happened at the WTC and why Crix's matchup percentage was so high is people didn't respect Dark Host, they only respected Ghost Fleet. So they didn't build lists going to the tournament expecting to play against Dark Host. They were just like, look, I shut down Ghost Fleet, we're good. And then they got there and got their shit wrecked. And they're like, turns out that the Coven's okay. A lot of people should have been worried about that.
She only won 76% of her games. It's no big deal.
Yeah, no biggie.
And it reminds me of a tournament that you and I went to, Brandon, where I was talking to what did that guy play?
Kador?
I think it was
Gateway?
Kador, actually.
You're talking about Gateway, right? First round of Gateway? No?
No,
What event?
I think it was a Springdale tournament, but anyways, I was talking to a guy outside, and he was like, I hope I get that Signar matchup. I hope we get the Signar matchup. I've got, the perfect answer to Signar. I've got it all lined out. I know exactly how to beat Haley 2. And then, I'm like, well, good luck, buddy. Good luck. And so he drops his Signar drop, and then his opponent drops, Kara Sloan. Mm-hmm. And just shoots him off the table. Yeah. Right? And so at the end of the next round, I walk up to him, and I'm like, hey, how'd your game go? Did you get the Signar? Because I found out he got the Signar matchup. I'm like, did you get the Signar drop you were wanting? He's like, yeah, I dropped my excellent, Haley 2. I dropped the list that gave me such an awesome game into Haley 2, and then I just got shot off the table by Sloan. And I kind of looked at him, and I'm like, well, yeah, because your opponent doesn't want to lose the game. If he knows that's what you're dropping,
sure, yeah,
then he's not going to drop that into you. He's going to, even if it's not a good game, even if it was he had a 30% chance with Haley 2 and only a 40% chance with Sloan, or a 30% chance with Sloan and a 20% chance with Haley 2, even if it's still a bad matchup, I'm not going to drop the worst matchup. I'm going to drop the one I think that gives me the most equity in the win. And so, sure enough, that's what he ran into.
They think they've answered their A-game list, so they stop working on it, and they're like, you actually haven't fixed the problem yet.
I think Crick's bullshit has actually helped a lot of people realize how list selection actually works.
Well, part of it is a lot of what's the term? It's not self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's not gambler's fallacy either. It's the thing where because you get a success result, you don't realize that you did it wrong. I can't remember what that's called though. It's you did it wrong, but you got rewarded for it, so you don't realize that you've made a mistake. And I think that's majority of it because
that's the psychological principle of negative reinforcement.
Yes. So you get into the situation, you're like, oh, look, I'm playing against High Reclaimer, and I've got everything in my list tech to beat High Reclaimer. And then you play the game, they don't play High Reclaimer, they play their other list because your list housed High Reclaimer, but you still played that list because you thought they might play High Reclaimer, and you beat them. It's like, well, that's just because protectorate lists are all the same, maybe, like, whatever reason. So, but anyway, you get paired against this guy, and like, oh, I beat his primary list, and he played his off list, and I still beat him. And it's like, it probably just happens by accident, because a lot of people come to tournaments with bad list pairs. Like, they show up, and they're like, oh, look, I've got Haley too, my other list is relevant. They're like, Constance Blaze with dumb shit. And you're like, well, sure, whatever. He's like, what are you going to do? What's that supposed to play into? He's like, it doesn't matter, I'm playing Haley too, I don't need a second list. And then they pair against some guy that's like, boosh, all the anti-Haley 2 ever, and you're like, oh god, I better play Constance, I guess. And then he gets housed because he didn't actually build a complementary pair to it. And so like that happens all the time, but then you finally get up against a good actual list pair, like current Crix pair. You're like, oh man, look at all my anti-Crix shooting, and you're like, awesome, Ghost Fleet, all stealth, and you're like, fuck. Like, it's like, yeah, I'm sure that happens a lot, and people get rewarded for making bad choices, and they don't realize they've only gone halfway down the pipe to get to the successful I've beaten a faction list pair, but their opponents haven't either, so they just get a win. Like,
And
yeah.
sometimes you just get crumbed.
Sometimes you just get crumbed. Sometimes someone sits across from you that doesn't know how to read, play the game, or roll dice, and he beats you. Or that their models are immune to effects.
So there's this great option in War Room for list selection.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Limit to Painted.
That's true, and you can now enter all of what is painted in all the factions.
Yeah. So that's the most important thing you should do for list creation. It's just check that box.
Nope. You're wrong.
Why?
Reasons.
I will say this: once you have like the vast majority of your faction painted, it's actually really cool to look at that painted box and then just be like, oh, I'll build these lists. Because that's where I'm at with trolls. Like, I'm at the point now where I'm a couple of light war beasts and
see,
some
Scott
other
agrees
stuff.
with me.
Yes, Scott, you're
And
correct.
he
This
is on
way more
twice as many
topic than what
podcasts
we
as
were
you.
doing. That's correct.
Muse isn't a real podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not now.
Anyways, the other point behind list construction that I kind of wanted to touch on was you don't have to build for everything, but you should have a plan for things. And sometimes you have to make concessions in your list to handle a specific matchup, but that doesn't mean you have to sell the list out. You don't have to send the list down the river, right? For example, if you know you're going to have to deal with a lot of incorporeal, there's a Scorn player in your area. This happens to me. Peyton's an exceptionally good Scorn player. There's a Scorn player in your area. You're going to see Void Spirits. You're going to have to make some concession to Void Spirits. Otherwise, they're probably just going to eat your lunch for a while. Like, if that happens, then it's okay to make a small concession in your list. Maybe you swap out this light beast for that light beast, or whatever the case may be, so you can get an extra magic weapon in there or something, right? I always think of that as making a concession in list building towards a particular list or design. That makes sense to me. That's perfectly fine to do. What you don't want to do, though, is start selling out your list and diluting it. Because at the minute, just like we said earlier, you start going down that rabbit hole, you may find out you don't have enough to get out on the other side if you get paired into a matchup that isn't what you're planning for. Now, no list lock helps a lot in SteamWar 2017, but the game is so deep and so wide right now that you really can't plan for everything. So sometimes you have to kind of plan for everything. You can't build to everything, but sometimes you can plan to everything, and sometimes you can make a small concession in your list for like one or two models that will help you get over the hump or whatever. And if you do that, then most of the time, as long as you have a good plan, you're probably going to bat an even game. Like, you're probably going to hit that 50-50 mark, and that's all you're after. So be careful when you're teching for a specific list, but it's okay to make small concessions towards a list.
Once you've decided like which of the matchups that you're going to try and plan for, you're obviously going to select either what faction you're playing or a couple different casters and kind of, like I said, brainstorm. Once you've started getting some stuff together, you should definitely try and get a couple polished lists together that you think complement each other, and then you actually need to practice them. Like, you need to put them on the table, ask players in your area to play specific matchups against you. And even if, like, let's say, for instance, you have no Crix players locally, but you want to plan for Crix, like, go find someone that's playing, like, Testament or or maybe Clockwork Legion or some kind of recursion list that you can, that's at least vaguely similar, or even if neither of you mind proxying the models and playing the list versus you, and that way you can at least get some table time with it. Because there's a lot of times, like for instance, I built a Old Witch 2 list and took it to Homecoming, and it didn't perform nearly like I thought it would because I didn't notice a couple interactions in the matchups before I actually got it on the table. So table time is the most important thing, but you can still do a lot of research and planning before you get the table time in, which will eliminate the early, like, more rough games that you get. Like, you'll eliminate those and start at a higher level in playtesting, basically, if you put the research in. So if you have limited table time, do as much out-of-game prep as you can. Like, do research on the meta, work on different lists, and make multiple list pairs even if you want to try out different things. If you play a game and it's not very good, maybe try it a couple more times with different strategies. Like, obviously, play it with different scenarios, different terrain setups. You know, get practice. Like, don't get confirmation bias. That was what I was looking for. Confirmation bias. Don't get confirmation bias because you beat the list once. Doesn't mean it's a good matchup for you. A lot of things could have happened that your opponent might not have experience versus you, and other people do. Like, I know a lot of people try to beat the Haley 2 matchup with a bunch of different things, and if you play one of those, like, headhunter lists, like Haley 2 or Denny 1 or Sorsha 1 sometimes, like, there's a lot of casters out there that get like, people playing to beat them because they're very good. And so everyone out there is trying to play against you. So the people that have played these casters for a really long time have seen all the counters that anyone's ever going to play against them, and they know how they work. And they might have found workarounds. So make sure you get multiple games in.
Even if you get that one win, like, or if you lose, the best thing you can do is re-rack immediately. Just re-rack and play that game. I remember we were testing a game of Sorsha 2 versus Horgle 2, and I ended up winning the game on scenario, but it wasn't really a win because you had helped me out with some things, and there was some clarification that needed to happen. But we were testing the game, and we played it, and unfortunately we didn't have a chance to re-rack it immediately. But you had made the comment. He's like, yeah, like, that's the way this game ends now. But if we re-rack this game, are you going to play it the same way? Like, is this going to happen the same way? Of course, the answer is no, because I've learned a lot in that one game. So a lot of times, the best thing you can do is just immediately re-rack and try it again.
Yeah, I remember, that's the game we played at the Geekery, right? I'm trying to remember. I remember I killed the Mountain King with, like, a destroyer or something weird.
Yeah, it turns out Sorsha 2... Well, it took...
it was like Sorsha 2 plus harm and something, but it died. But it was just like the way we... I remember coming out the way we played the game, like, you should have put, like, your slags behind walls and stuff to try and protect them. Because I think I killed a slag on, like, the opening salvo that you totally didn't need to give me.
Yep.
Yeah, and stuff like that happened. And obviously that affects the game a lot.
Yep, absolutely. And now that I knew it, like, I can go back and I can play that matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really funny because I ended up playing that Hortle 2 list at an event not long after that, and ended up getting stuck against a Khador player who was playing Vlad 1 Rockets. Well, it's not quite as destructive as Sorsha 2 Rockets, but it was amazing because I knew exactly what I needed to do. Like, immediately those slags take up advantageous positions. I'm willing to throw away the Mountain King to get where I need to go because I don't need the Mountain King to kill his jacks. Like, I mean, immediately the entire tempo of that game changed for no other reason than just, I got a chance to play that game. I got to see how it works. So now I understood it. So I re-rack it, put it on the table, and doing a lot better. So you got to play it. I also think people, while we're talking about this, just as a brief digression, I also think people have a tendency to build their 2-list pair, and then they will test their primary, air quotes, list. And the reality to it is there's no such thing as a primary list and an off list. I hate that phrase. I use it a lot, and it's inaccurate is why I don't like it. Because you have a list designed to handle some things, and you have a list designed to handle others. Like, that's all there is to it.
I think there is some truth to it, but I think people do use the term incorrectly. Like, when we were at Homecoming and I played Sean, I had Old Witch 1 and my Vlad list. And he selected knowing that my Old Witch list beats Thexus, but probably loses to Ostrom. So he was really worried about my Old Witch list. But he doesn't know that I'm here to play Vlad. Like, he just didn't know that because he hadn't seen me at tournaments yet. So we sit down and play, and then he finds out, like, after we do this, he's like, well, why did you play Vlad? I think that Witch was better overall into my list pair. I was like, oh, it's my off list. Like, I don't play that list unless I have to. Like, I'm here to play Vlad. I have so many reps with this list, it doesn't matter if it's a bad matchup. Like, I'm going to play it, and I'm probably going to do well with it.
I see that point. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, and I'm not arguing that because that's true, because I've done that with Doomshaper 3. You've watched me countless times with Doomshaper 3. I'm not arguing that. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I think people get too caught up in what is your primary and what is your off list. And so people have a tendency to play your primary list about 10 times more than they play their off list. Yeah. And the reality to it is the off list is the specialist counter a lot of times. It's the silver bullet, it's the I'm filling in all your gaps that your primary list doesn't. Mm-hmm. And you need to have as many, if not more, reps with your off list than you do with your primary, just because of the nature in which a lot of those, especially if you're using an opposites style list pair, you need to play more games with your off list than you do with your primary because of the nature of the lists that you're going to drop your off list into.
Yeah, the matchups are more important because your primary or your go-to list have effectively no chance of winning it, which is why you've built a second list to deal with it.
Exactly. And so you need to know those matchups.
It's very important that, especially if you're building a targeted list or like a specific counter, that you get those games in. It is very important. Because you don't want the first time you get to play the game and find out that your matchup doesn't actually work the way it should to be in the finals of a tournament that you're trying to win. Yeah. Like at Homecoming, I played against Bannon in the third round, and I brought an anti-Ghost Fleet Coven drop. And we're playing Denny 1 Ghost Fleet into Old Witch, and I find out on turn 2 that my list does not work at all versus Denny 1 Ghost Fleet. I'm like, oh yeah, my Murder Crows doesn't deal magical damage, and my Feet doesn't deal magical damage. So the Crows, or the Black Mage just fucking charge me.
Well, Witch's Feet doesn't deal magical damage.
No. I know. So he's literally like, so if I just Scourge you and then charge you with all these Black Banes, you just die. And I'm like, yeah, that would appear to be the case. And literally, like, the Bonejack walks up to Scourge me, I roll Feet damage on it and takes 6 to the 3 or 4, and to the point takes out his Arc Node. 6 to the Arc Node takes it out to the point. Then he goes to walk Denny through the forest to just cast Scourge himself. I'm like, just so you know, before you move in, because I know you're kind of pressed for time, you're going to fall down to the feet damage automatically and die. And he's like, oh, thank you. And moves her back behind the forest. And he's like, okay, then, yeah. And then, like he just didn't know what to do at that point. But it was like, I literally got saved because I rolled, like, a fucking, 10 on my fucking feet damage or whatever it was. It's like, literally saved a game that I should have lost. Because all of the tech I thought I had doesn't work against his models.
And again, that goes back to playing that off list.
Yeah. Right, exactly. No, I had plenty of reps with Old Witch. I just didn't have any of the actual matchup I was going to play. It was just terrible, yeah. I should have played... If I had played Sorcerer 2, it wouldn't have been a game. I would have just RFP'd all of his shit and been done with it. But I wanted to play Old Witch instead, for some reason.
I think that's also a place for list construction where reaching out to your peers is a good idea. So if you're looking at something and you know you can't get the reps in, like I'm the only Khador player in my immediate area. So if I'm building a list to play against Khador, I have and it's a little easier because I played Khador for a while, so I know what they do. But if I'm building a list to beat Khador, and I'm not 100% certain about something, or I think I can't look at it objectively, post that online and see if you can get some feedback. You have to be careful when you do that because you'll get all kinds of comments, and some of them are going to be helpful and some of them probably not as much. But that's a really good time when it's a good idea to reach out to the community. And you can also kind of look at the names of the people who reply and then kind of get a feel for who they are. And so if you spend enough time in the online community, you'll kind of know okay, this person, feels this way about it. And so you can kind of frame their responses and it helps.
I'm going to help you, Scott. That's actually you're missing a key phrase here. You got to sort out the idiots.
No, I'm not gonna call anybody an idiot, and I'm not gonna say don't go online.
No, I think you should. Going online is a valuable tool. But I mean, if you're going online and you don't normally is the most dangerous because you will get false positives. People will tell you stuff and they'll be saying it without a lot of experience, or they'll be playing it into like a weird variation. Like I've seen in Mark II, I watched a game where Morvana 2 lost to Morvana 1. And Morvana 2 has purification. Like, I watched this game happen, I'm like, what is happening? But both of them played such weird lists that's just the way the matchup worked. And I was like, oh my god. But, like, so sometimes they'll just have false positives like that. And they're giving you honest feedback of an experience they've had. It's just this random skewed piece of information that's not really useful, and neither of you know that. So just be careful and like make sure. And once you've been on the communities for a while, you can kind of get a feel for like who plays the most, who plays the styles you play, who plays the types of lists you play, and that will help you sort out your feedback.
Absolutely.
So yeah, obviously get as much feedback as you can. If you can't get to local people that can help you out, then and you have a small meta, obviously reach on like to the internet, try and find some people that do. There are some podcasts that will actually, you can send them like questions and requests and stuff, and maybe they can like play a specific game for you and let you know how it goes. I know one of our locals even contact. I think it was like Arcane Assist or some other podcast. He sent a message into. He's like, "Hey, a friend of mine built me this list. Can you please play it and let me know what you think? Because I've been struggling with it." And they played the list. Like, yeah, this list is freaking great, especially into what he told you it was good into. And like, you should have lots of fun with this list and do these things with it. And like he was like, yeah, hey, thanks for building me a good list. I'm like, you're welcome. Like, how do you know it's good? He's like, oh, I sent it to this guy. He played it for me. He says it's really good. I'm like, oh, you didn't just show up to play? I was like, I don't have much time to play. Like, all right, well, whatever. Like, well, thanks, buddy.
But you do have a good point. Like a lot of times you can send messages to, like you can send messages to LT Wargame, and we're always happy to help. We're always happy to talk lists. You can send messages to Muse on Minis, Arcane Assist.
Jeremy is violently shaking his head right now.
We don't encourage contacting other podcasts
or us. No.
See, I just don't have. I just don't have access to the Facebook.
Well, we try to keep it that way.
No, I know. It's a good thing. It's like, hey, LT Wargame, what do you think of this? My response would be like, suck less.
So if you want to message even me directly, I don't care. Like, if you have a question about a list or like you need help with the list pair, just please, for the love of God, do not text me a list of like models and like, is this a good list? Like, I don't like, that's not a question. Like, you need context. You're like, here's my list A, here's my list B. I'm trying to cover this thing, and it's giving me fits, but I also don't want to.
Unless it's pictures of cock.
Yeah, don't send me pictures of cocks. That's a quick way to get banned. But if you're trying to send me, and then ask me like, hey, I'm trying to cover this without losing my matchup into this. Like, what do you think? Like, is there something I can do? And maybe it's not even a list problem. Maybe it's just like a small play issue. Like, I played against Carl, like against the Denny 1 list with my old Witch 2, and I put my Outriders way too far on the flank, and I lost 4 of them to fucking Ghost Cane, because apparently he can just kill 4 like elite infantry models without even trying. Like, I just didn't think about it. Well, no, but he didn't even get them under Withering. Like they just shot them to death. I was like,
did
great.
Ghost Cannons?
Do what?
What shot him to death?
Ghost Cane.
Oh, yeah, that'll kill it.
So, but it's just because I didn't know to keep them more interior, so that way they're covered by Windstorm more. Because he's only like range 5 versus Windstorm. I just needed to do better. And I just didn't know that about the matchup, so I lost like a 20-point unit to nothing. But, it's small things like that can make a big difference in a game. And we might cover this a little bit more next time too. We'll probably talk about list selection as well, because I'd like to finish this topic as a whole, because list selection is as important as list construction, I think. I saw in one tournament, Carl, 2 rounds in a row, basically win a game in list selection because win or lose a game in list selection because he didn't understand, him or his opponent didn't understand the matchup.
Is this the team tournament? Or?
Yeah, this is a teamer. So for previous round, he played Scott. I don't think Scott actually understood which list he was supposed to play, or just how to play the list, maybe once he got selected. And so Scott lost versus Carl, and then next round he plays against you, and Carl literally rolls for his list. Like, you can't trick me, I'm going random, like, but you're not. Stop yelling. So Carl thought that he was in list chicken when he's literally not in list chicken at all. It's actually extremely important which list he selects. And he perceived it to be list chicken and was completely wrong. and ended up easily losing a game that might have been playable, but it was not playable the way it ended up.
We did end up playing the correct matchup he should have selected as a test game. It's an advantage game for Testament, but it's tough.
But it's better than getting destroyed.
Oh, it's better than, like, no game, yes.
Yeah, I can tell you my lists that day. Like, I was the throwaway into Carl. Like, we looked at my list, and I should have played my other list. You're absolutely right.
But there's no reason. In a 3-person team event, you don't throw a game away. That's not how that works. That's a bad idea.
Well, like, when I say I was the throwaway, Brent didn't understand how the list selection process worked.
I believe that.
So he accidentally put me into that matchup. Brent was supposed to be in that matchup. I was supposed to play against the Lilith 3 player, but he screwed up and got it backwards. So he ends up dropping Haley 2 into Lilith 3, and his butthole is puckered the entire time.
Oh,
and I'm just getting waylaid by Carl.
Carl's list should have been the first list on the table against us. Because I happen to be the first list on the table, because that's the only way we can guarantee a 2 out of 3 it might be Carl. I plan to, because I was the only person on our team that could even beat Crix.
Sure.
So, yeah. That format's weird, though.
To say the least. No, it's super fun though. It's a great format. We need to schedule another one for that format anyway, because it's so much fun. If you haven't got a chance to play in it, if you're relatively close to the KC metro area, the next time Brandon runs one of these team events, you totally should come down and play for it. The team events are an amazing amount of fun. They're an awesome way to set up, and they're excellent. And you need to be at one. You need to at least experience it because it's so much fun.
I do believe MomCon also runs the same team tournament.
I did want to ask though. So if we've attacked the list building part, and we're going to save the list selection process for next week.
All right. I think we've gone long enough on this. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I have been Brandon.
This is Richard.
Jeremy.
Seabass.
I don't know who that is.
You know, Taylor Moon.
Oh,
He's on 2
that
podcasts.
one.
He's too cool for us.
I was thinking beyond the normal rambling that we do.
Hookers and blow.
Beyond the normal rambling we do so well. I thought we could talk about list construction.
What?
What? Are you upset?
Back to the basics?
Yeah. Well, I mean, mainly I had like a 3.5 hour conversation last night with Merle about this, so I'm like, it's currently at the front of my mind.
List construction's definitely a solid choice. I'd like to recap Warmachine Weekend real quick.
Nah, that's dumb.
I mean, I didn't lose in the first round, so
That's correct. First round of your opponent conceding on top of one.
nope.
Okay.
At least you're not the guy that lost top at 2, though.
That is true. I also didn't lose to Winterguard Command. I don't know what's more embarrassing.
Is this on? Are we recording yet? Please tell me we're recording.
Yeah,
Okay, we're recording. That's good. I am so glad that Bubba did not.
So you wanted to make sure that you blow this person up, just confirming.
No, I just want to say that I'm so glad Bubba didn't win, so I don't have to respect Winterguard Command as a real list yet.
Yeah.
Just kidding. I still want to respect the list even if he won.
So, what I was thinking was, I mean, we can certainly talk about other things too, or not talk about this, but that's just my thought.
No, I think list construction is a great topic to talk about. I'd love to make that the focal point of the episode. Unfortunately, my version of list construction is pretty much go look up whatever you and Brent and Keith and everyone else tells me to play, but it's still worth talking about.
Scott, you're Troll Jesus now. You have to come up with the lists.
He did. Don't you remember?
Grim to you.
No, he selected Madrak and selected all the obvious models, and it went well.
No, actually, my Grim 2 list is pretty much my own design. I filtered it through a lot of people, but that list is my design. It's my concept, anyway. I can't say it's my design. Between Carl and Brent and Keith and you and everybody else who all have had really a lot of input on it, but it's the core concept behind it was mine. So I can claim that as my list. I'm okay doing that. And that Doomshaper 3 list we dojoed a long time ago, I'm still playing the skeleton of that list.
I'm going to cut you off for a second. I think we need to mess with sound a little bit. I'm getting a huge amount of static.
Yeah, that's...
I'm getting way more static than Scott. Okay, so what is this? What did you just do?
That's the main volume.
Okay, so turn that down. Does that just not matter?
Yeah.
There was a moment when it was like clear. All right, Scott, sound check. Okay, Scott was just dead. That's why. God, why is this so staticky? Huh.
Is this any better?
You sound louder now.
You're louder, but there's a lot of static.
1 sec.
Ooh. I knew that was coming.
Give it a shake. All the way down.
All right, sound check.
Hey, is this any better?
It's probably okay. What? Hold on, let me adjust my little standy stand here.
Sound check.
Shut up.
No, you.
All right.
Actually, if you do want to pull it closer to you. Closer. Like to the edge of the table. There you go.
You should be like 6 inches or so from your mic. Not like the Muse mics where you have to master talking with something inside of your mouth. But all right, on three.
I mean, if you want to put it in your mouth,
Okay.
I'll adjust it.
Jeremy's got the video recording.
All right,
He's ready to upload.
On three, everyone sound check. 1, 2, 3.
Sound
Penis.
check.
Sound
right.
check.
You are all late. Now I just look like a stupid idiot.
So what's different?
How now, brown cow?
Brown now, how cow?
How much wood woodchuck chuck a woodchuck could chuck wood?
None?
A woodchuck would chuck all the wood he could if a woodchuck could chuck wood. I don't know how the rest of it actually goes. Doesn't matter. We're good to go. Everybody ready?
Ready, steady, go.